moving forward. It keeps them in that Spring Hill cluster moving forward and going through that way. We looked at 3 options for Battle Creek, and they were primarily, the first 2 were very similar. The difference between the first 2 was Kedron Road itself. If you know, Malon Moore Elementary is going to sit probably about a mile off of Kedron when you turn it back Hummingbird and go to the back of that neighborhood. And we looked at it as being the northern boundary for that zone. We had 2 options. We could either include Kedron itself in, or 3 options really, in the new school zone. We could leave it in Marvin Wright's zone, or we could make it a split school and have the south side of Kedron go to the new school and the north side go to Marvin Wright, stay there. That seems to create issues. When we travel with buses, we try to use natural dividing lines. A major road, a major artery like Kedron is a natural divide. You either live north of it or south of it. And if you say that, folks understand. I'm north of Kedron because of that major divide. The task force looked at the numbers and then also the map of option B. Do you have that map of option B, Mr. Breen?
Yes, let me pull that up.
And decided that it made more sense for Kedron to stay with the new school. 1, geographically, because it created the boundary. 2, because if you notice, you've got 4 zones shown on this map that you're looking at. Marvin Wright is in blue at the very top. The middle, the Battle Creek is the cream colored that shoots through the middle. To the south of that is Randolph Howell, and to the west, across 31, is Spring Hill Elementary. So Kedron would create the natural northern border for this zone. It would run from Highway 31 all the way out to the county line past 431. And the southern border of this zone for Battle Creek pretty much follows the old northern border of Randolph Howell before we expanded it. And so we went through there. There is a couple of movements beyond the Kedron Road. If you notice, we go all the way to 31, again, using that as a natural divider. Under this plan, if you live on the west side of 31 going north, you would go to Spring Hill Elementary. If you live on the east side of 31, you would go to either Marvin Wright or the new school, depending on where that line comes. Currently, the artery of 31 right there, you've got neighborhoods, as Mr. Breeden moves his mouse, that's the Mill Creek neighborhood, the Honey Farm neighborhood. You've got the not Grand Reserve, I forget the name behind Dollar General, it may be Grand Reserve. Grove Park. Those schools all currently go to Spring Hill Elementary, and we would be pulling those students from Spring Hill Elementary, sending them to the new school. Reasoning for that, for Marvin Rock, for pulling Kedron and for pulling 31, beyond the natural divides, beyond the migratory patterns of where they would go, we are seeing more development come to Spring Hill in the 2 zones that would be Marvin Wright and Spring Hill Elementary. Spring Hill Elementary obviously carries the area over next to Spring Hill Middle School. You know, the new, is it Homestead properties are going in there and building rather rapidly on the front end. You've got some new neighborhoods off of Freehand Road. So we're seeing that if we pull the Honey Farm, those schools to the new school, it makes sense geographically. It also opens up space at Spring Hill Elementary for these new neighborhoods coming in. Same thing with Marvin Wright. By pulling Kedron Road to the new neighborhood or to the new school, you've got a development off Tom Lund, you've got the expansion of Meadowview, you've got a whole section out here off of 431 where they have run sewer and run water under the interstate. We actually have a development right there on, I think, Joe Brown, on the corner of Joe Brown that's coming in. And we have one right up at the very northern tip of Murray going into Williamson that's about to start development as well. So the Marvin Wright zone, the Spring Hill Elementary zone, we know we're currently going to see new development very fast. Not to say that the Battle Creek zone will not, because there is a large development. Obviously the Honey Farm is expanding, Grove Park is expanding. There's a large dairy farm on Greens Mill that will be developed in the next couple of years. So looking at the numbers that option B provided, it gave us the best balance for the schools, also leaving growth in each one of those districts.
Any questions? Mr. Bates, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Did you hear that question, Mr. Bates? Did you have anything, questions on that presentation?
No, I did not.
All right, well, we can move on to Battle Creek Middle.
Okay.
That too is option B, it looks like, from the task force.
Let me close out some of these other things and load that up.
You will see that the options for the middle school drew directly from the options that we gave the task force for the elementary school. They kind of held suit. The difference was all of the options didn't necessarily impact Kedron Road because we see that as going to the new middle school no matter what. We looked at an area north of Saturn Parkway as being the big difference in these options. And Mr. Breeden, I think we went with option B. If he'll pull that map up. You can see we followed the same southern boundary that would divide Battle Creek Elementary and Randolph Howell as the dividing line for the new middle school. We went all the way out to the eastern border of the county, past 431, against Marshall County, up against Williamson, and came around the north side. The one difference that we did make with this and we took was that part of Marvin Wright Elementary School, the area that's north of Saturn Parkway, if you're traveling Saturn Parkway to 65 and you look to your left, once you pass Kedron Road, you'll notice off of Reserve Boulevard there are very large neighborhoods that have gone in over there. We looked at that area and felt with the growth that's going to be in the current Marvin Wright district, it will fill the middle school rather rapidly. Plus, if we pull the entire Marvin Wright zone and then part of Randolph Howell zone, plus the Spring Hill Elementary zone, and we shift those to the new middle school, we dropped the numbers at Spring Hill Middle School significantly. So we looked at the area north of Saturn Parkway, again, Saturn Parkway being a natural divide, being a way that we can ingress and egress in and out of those neighborhoods. Logically, you can come out of Reserve Boulevard, take a left on Kedron, jump 31, and you are at Spring Hill Middle in 5 minutes. So it makes sense to go that way necessarily rather than trying to travel across and come south. So we kept that area right there with Spring Hill Middle School. That is the only difference between option B for the elementaries and option B for the middle schools.
And so I might just add, Mr. Perriman, so basically all of the students for the new Battle Creek Middle School are currently zoned to Spring Hill Middle. We did not move any students from any other school.
No. Currently, they are all the students that would be in the Battle Creek zone are zoned to Spring Hill Middle. So we would move those students in that Battle Creek zone to Battle Creek Middle School. We would take and of course, even the students that we're leaving in reserves that we would say go to Spring Hill Middle School, they currently go there. So it wouldn't be a change of sending them kind of off somewhere differently. That would be right now, that's their natural funnel upwards. We would just take the area south of Saturn Parkway and push it to the new school.
Did I see Cox Middle School on the numbers?
You do see Cox on the numbers.
How does that affect Cox?
It does not.
Okay.
And you'll see that Cox pretty much stayed stagnant with A and B. If we had chosen option C for the elementary school, it came all the way down to Bear Creek Pike, east of 65. And since that option wasn't taken, it left Cox alone.
So you're saying Cox right now is at 64%?
Under Dr. Register's numbers, okay. A capacity number of 1189. Now we questioned, I know you guys have questioned that, we questioned that number as well, but using that number at that time, that's where it was. It would, in reality, probably be a much higher number than 64, but with those numbers, that's where it is.
These numbers up here at the top are the current enrollment. So like, for instance, the time we looked at Spring Hill Middle School, the current enrollment was 934, and the capacity number we had was 1,029. So that's what those numbers up there mean. And of course, the new school, current enrollment 0, and the capacity we know is going to be 1,000.
And you will see, and I think I would ask either Mr. Bates or Mr. Moore or Ms. Kinzer to maybe see what we ran into with the task force is, no matter what you do, you see Spring Hill Middle's numbers tend to kind of drop, which led to the domino effect of the task force later on saying, how do we address Spring Hill Middle? And so some of what moved from here was we created the new zone for the new middle and elementary school, and then needed to fill a need in Spring Hill Middle that task force then said, how do we get that capacity number to one that could possibly help Cox, could possibly help Whitthorne, could possibly keep our alignment of that K-12 alignment of a cluster? How could we make that work forward? And so we went with option B, which did not drop it all the way to 37, but left it at 50, and then said, do we create help for that later on? But option B was, C and D were eliminated by the task force because they eliminated that option for the elementary school. They didn't even want to discuss that because it would change and take Cox kids north. What they went with was A and B, and decided it made more sense to leave the area north of Saturn Parkway with Spring Hill Middle rather than Battle Creek.
And obviously, Mr. Perryman, one of the things considered was, depending on how quickly this growth happens to the west of 31, there may be a future date when these students would have to be rezoned to the new school. Right now, we've kind of tried to keep 31 as a natural barrier all the way up, but we're unable to do it there. But it makes sense to almost at some point we're going to have schools that serve the west side of 31 and schools that serve the east side of 31. Eventually, even with the high school, when a new high school will be built, it seems to like, based on development, that will continue to be kind of that guideline.
And even if we had gone with option A, you would have still a little portion of on the west side of, or excuse me, the east side of 31, because that would be the Spring Hill Middle cluster. I mean, Spring Hill Elementary. So basically, where you see the split that we quit using 31 as the divide is right there at the crossings when you run housing-wise basically into Old Spring Hill, into that kind of that natural area of a cluster right there. Yeah, you can see it would come across right there. The Spring Hill Elementary zone comes across
right in
there.
Here.
Yeah.
31 continues to go right up that way.
And we do have, right now, our hottest area of development where we are actually seeing kids come into our buildings is the Nashville Highway Corridor. Both on the east side with the Honey Farm, with Grove Park, and on the west side where you've got the Homestead at Carter's Creek Station. If you've not driven into it, you need to drive back there. It's the one beside the cemetery when you go north. It is just getting bigger and bigger.
And it joins, is it Arden Village?
It's going to join Arden Village.
And there's a new development going between the two.
Between them, right? When you go past, when you're going north, you've got the Homestead at Carter's Creek Station. You've got the cemetery. If you notice the next farm right there, they've pushed out. They're actually going to come in from the backside from the Homestead at Carter's Creek Station. And all those neighborhoods will join together. Basically, you'll have the cemetery, the pet cemetery, and right now Daniel's Farm would be the ones that are left. But the rest of it's closing in around. It's going all the way over to Fry Road, if you have kind of a geography of that. And it's going to come out at the bottom of the hill on Carter's Creek Station. So it is going to be a huge, by the time it's completely done, development that will come up 31, go towards the middle school. And then obviously you've got Homestead started on Cleburne, but there are two more neighborhoods that have not begun on Cleburne that are south of Homestead, between Petty Lane and Homestead, that would run up Petty Lane and will run up Cleburne up to where Homestead starts. So we expect a great deal of growth on that side in the next couple of years. And we are actually seeing the Nashville Highway corridors where we're actually picking up new kids right now on buses.
And a lot and I know there's a lot of factors to consider. Many of these are dependent upon infrastructure. It's my understanding from talking with the city of Spring Hill that they have released the construction of extending Saturn Parkway around to Beechcroft. I was in a discussion earlier this week where there are plans already up that eventually would go all the way to 840. So as that corridor opens up, obviously that makes that side of much more accessible, which will give the opportunity for more homes to develop.
So these numbers are actual students right now, not projected for, okay.
We do, and it may be a good time to show that map of the actual students, the ones that
yeah.
We gave this to you. This was not in the information you received. We pulled this up this morning just as an FYI. If you look, that's Murray County. It looks like big clusters of dark. Those are actually circles that represent all of our students.
Every one of those is a home that has a student.
Every one of those is a home that has a student on it. When you click on that circle, if there are 4 students in that home, it pulls up 4 different names. If you click on one, it's just one name. But this gives you the county, and it shows you where clusters of students actually live. You can see, obviously, Columbia, Spring Hill, Mount Pleasant are the large clusters. You've got some out toward Culleoka. You see not as much toward Santa Fe or Hampshire.
You are to go to the second period at the ringing of the bell. If you have U.S. history, you are to report upstairs to the library. At the ringing of the bell, everyone else goes to the second period. Thank you.
If you can tell on there, and if not, I can come down and show you on this map, or Mr. Bree can show you 31 right there. Those are the new neighborhoods that we're talking about. 2 to 3 years ago, those were not black at all. Those were open spaces, much like out in the county. If you look over around Marvin Wright, you can see that. You can see, again, probably go back even 4 to 5 years ago, those are very sparse as far as where the numbers are. So we're seeing a lot of growth right there. We're starting to see large, intense populations of students up through there. And the new schools for Battle Creek would fall relatively right in the middle of that. If you go to your left, right in there, just a little north of that, that's where they would be, right there. That's where the schools will sit. So they're actually sitting in new clusters of hot students as far as growth. But that's an interesting map just to show you kind of where our students do live across the district.
Any questions from board members? All right. Moving on, you want to talk about Spring Hill?
Next thing is the consideration of moving students who currently attend Cox Middle School and go to Spring Hill High School, of redistricting them to attend Central High School. And I'm going to close some of these things just to not to have so many things open if I could.
If you looked at the current Spring Hill High School zone, it is the largest zone in the district. It runs basically from Theta Pike all the way up to Theta, around the Williamson County line, all the way to the Marshall County line and down.
I don't think I have that map on here to show.
No, that current map. It runs all the way south to the river along 431. And basically the river is the divide between the Spring Hill High School and Culleoka zones. And I don't know that folks actually think about those two zones butting up against one another, but they do. Spring Hill High School comes in Sal Mill Pike all the way into town, to almost to Tom J. Hitch. You've got all the kids that live out Bear Creek Pike, both on the north and the south side, Jackson Heights, Shantae Akers, all of that, it goes to Spring Hill High School. So you have not only a Spring Hill cluster of kids going there, you have a very large Columbia cluster of children that go there. Plus you have a very rural kind of eastern part of our county that may not associate with Columbia or Spring Hill. They may be closer shopping wise to Chapel Hill or to Lewisburg, but they attend Spring Hill High School. So what we were asked in the task force was to look at moving some of those students to Columbia Central High School to adjust the imbalance between student populations that were there as far as the percentages. And we came back with 3 options. Obviously, we looked at option A was the Cox Middle School zone south of Bear Creek. So what we said was if you attended Cox Middle School and you live south of Bear Creek Pike, those students go to Spring Hill High School currently. That's all out Mount Olivet, out Rock Springs, out Sal Mill, that whole area. We looked at moving those to Central High School. You can see
Here's the map.
in that number what that does as far as the options there. Yes, that's the zone we're looking at. The cream colored area right there is what we would be talking about moving from Spring Hill High School to Central. You see that if you live out at Tom Littlejohn or you live at Hardison Mill, they are kind of our outliers. They don't associate necessarily with either community. We get them probably to Spring Hill a little faster than we can to Central, one because we don't have to fight the traffic of Columbia, but we do have two natural inlays. One is Bear Creek Pike and two is Sal Mill Pike to bring those kids in.
Kind of this area right in here, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's that area right there.
All the way out to here.
All the way out to the county
You
line.
see not many students right out in there.
Yeah, not a lot. We travel a long way out there with buses to pick up a few kids. But we travel long, I mean, we have kids that leave Spring Hill High School that live at Hardison Mill, that live at Tom Littlejohn, that live out on Johnson Creek. They're pushing an hour and a half. Their buses are not full when they leave, but they are pushing that time limit just because it is so far. The two buses that serve that area for Spring Hill High School both stop at Cox Middle School and pick up the middle school kids for that area so that we are not running 4 buses out there rather than 2. So, but they do ride. I've driven both of those buses. It's bus 24 and bus 55, and it's a long way. It's a lot of cedar trees and a lot of rock and a lot of by yourself out in the middle of nowhere out there. But they are out
beautiful there. Eastern Murray County.
Beautiful. It's almost Marshall County. It's that pretty. So,
If they're rezoned to Central, what does that make the bus ride?
probably about the same.
The same?
Probably. Because once you serve those back roads, where you're going to come in and you're going to 2 arteries coming in Sal Mill Pike. Some buses, we may divide them differently now than we do with the current buses. One bus probably would serve Sal Mill to the south, and it would come in Sal Mill Iron Bridge, come across Tom Hitch, and probably come across the square and go straight to Central. That's probably the fastest route rather than trying to get on Bear Creek, or especially in the morning time. You can't travel Bear Creek. The other bus would probably come in Bear Creek, and it would have a pretty, I mean, if you've gone through the Cox Middle School zone in the morning, it's a 25-minute wait some mornings just to get through it. Then we run into that would impact us pretty dramatically on how long they're on the bus. That bus, both of those buses probably, or at least one of them's going to still have to pick up Cox Middle School kids, because it's just not feasible to run 2 buses that far out to pick up the low number of children that you pick up. So as far as that, it doesn't really change a lot. What it does change is the percentage of capacity in the 2 buildings.
Right.
And that's what it looks like.
But you feel like with traffic and everything, we'd still be under the hour and a half?
Oh, we will have to be under the hour and a half no matter what.
Okay.
Even if we had to throw a 3rd bus into the mix, you have to be under it.
But it's not any farther.
It's not any further, it's just more, it's going to be a little bit more congestion coming through. We looked at that. That was the option that the committee or the task force took. The other 2 options we looked at was the Shantae Akers area. I believe Mr. Breeden has a map of that. And Shantae Akers, if you are at the Bear Creek 31 intersection, right there where McDonald's is, it is the neighborhood in behind the Polk Motel all the way up to Columbia Rock Road. That is basically Shantae Acres. You can see it expands.
It's not labeled, but this is,
that's
412.
Yeah, that's 412, 31 to the right side of that zone. That is Columbia Rock Road, actually running out to Theta Pike is the northern side. And we extended it all the way out. We took in part of Highway 7 to say we treat that as that same area. That's basically one bus right there. So it all kind of falls into an area. It goes all the way up to Athendale. And we have a funny, we meet funny places in the county. If you go out Highway 7 headed toward Santa Fe, if you know where Chickasaw Trace is, where Athendale is, Central, Spring Hill High School, Santa Fe all meet there. As far as elementary schools, Baker, Riverside, Spring Hill Elementary, Santa Fe, they all meet right there kind of at that funny area. So this would be that area. We looked at moving that area to Central High School. There are a couple little areas. There's probably one little area right out here at Roberts Bend that already goes to Central, but we treated that as an area that would move from Spring Hill High School to Central. Those kids within the neighborhood portion of Shantae Acres all go to Spring Hill High School right now. A rather large group too, off of Theta Pike, go to Spring Hill.
That was option B,
That was
correct?
option B.
Okay, Eric, one of the considerations was gentrification.
Right.
In that, and we had to be cognizant of that.
Yes. That area changes the demographics at Spring Hill High School dramatically.
What about the numbers from the option A to option B, the numbers of students?
Option A roughly runs around 157 students. Now keep in mind this, please. Anytime I draw a line around an area and run a number, it gives me the actual number of students who live in that area. I can run a second report that says how many of those kids go to Spring Hill High School. There are 157 kids that live in that zone. Around 145 of them go to Spring Hill High School. Some already go to Central. You've got some that may go to Northfield. They may go somewhere. You may have a teacher that lives there and they go to Santa Fe.
And
But
when you
that's
say
around
they're going
157.
to another school, they're going as
They're
an
going
out-of-zone request.
Right, they're going through the out-of-zone process. So there are 157 students that live in the Bear Creek Pike South, roughly right about that number, and I'm coming off my head with that number. In Shantae Acres, it's around 100 students. So we looked at both of those options. And then we considered, actually, I've got the numbers on there. 159 south of Bear Creek Pike, 103 in Shantae Acres. I was close. And so if you do both, 262. If you do both, you basically just flip the problem. You make this school full and Spring Hill empty, whereas Spring Hill's full and not empty, but a lower percentage. So we did not think that was a viable option. And we actually, in the task force, and I mentioned this earlier, had a consideration for Spring Hill Middle School, in that we kind of moved, we said Shantae Acres would stay with Spring Hill High School, and we would also cluster those kids to Spring Hill Middle instead of going to Cox right now, because right now they go to Riverside to elementary school, they go to Cox to middle school, then they make the transition to the separate cluster to Spring Hill High School at grade 9. We looked at it and said they're going to have to make a transition one way or the other. It would be an easier transition academically to do that earlier at grade 5 and give them that long period of time together rather than doing a transition late in their career. So the committee went with option A, which was the Bear Creek Pikes zone. They had also kind of tied that into with some discussion about the middle school as well. That we weren't asked to make that discussion with you guys today, but it was part of a bigger discussion.
And so A was the one that was the recommended option.
Any other questions on that?
And historically, that when I started teaching at Cox years ago, that section went to Central. It moved during one, when I was at Cox 17 years, we did 6 major rezonings. It moved in one of the major rezonings. So those kids had been at Central, moved to Spring Hill, and this would put that area back where historically for the largest part of time it had been.
Can you go back to your map you had?
Yes.
This map here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's the northern boundary?
Bear Creek. And we, in this scenario, left Bear Creek Pike going to Spring Hill High School. If your house address was Bear Creek Pike, we left you going to Spring Hill High School rather than doing a split and one side going to one and one side going the other. And then also, when we bumped the line across Bear Creek, it shot kind of the number way up to where you just kind of did the same thing. You started moving Central to a very high capacity rather than kind of evening them out.
On the numbers that you gave us for now, with what we have now in the projected growth for next year, Central was at 0.
Did that come from you guys?
It did.
That's correct. It is. You don't expect any more students at Central?
Based on the patterns that we've seen the last few years, we expect them to be similar to what it is now.
Okay, because
Yep.
they were the exact same numbers. I just
Yep.
was really surprised.
And what we're seeing busing wise in Columbia, we have some new neighborhoods. Armstrong Meadows out here off Hampshire Pike is exploding right now. You're seeing new growth there. But we're also seeing areas such as the Highland Park area that are losing kids. So that's part of what explains that, is you do have growth in Columbia and you have new growth, but you're also seeing areas that are shifting to non-student populations for whatever reasons.
Any other questions on this related to Spring Hill High School?
Mr. Bates, she asked for any more questions in case you didn't hear that.
Yes, I heard. I'm good. Thanks.
Mr. Perriman, just had a question, and I know we addressed this in the task force, and you touched on it a little bit. Some of the growth potential, and I guess this covers all three of those zones, high school, middle, and elementary, on the east side of 65. You said a little bit. I mean, that was, I know one of the concerns we had, but there's some really high potential, and again, just planning ahead over the next few years. If you could go into that a little bit.
If you look at that east side of 65, most of the high growth potential is to the north, which is in that blue up there. Pretty much, if you see where Bear Creek, there's 65. If you see where Bear Creek crosses 65, right there, where his area, right there, that area north, that chunk north that is associated with Spring Hill, is starting to see a great deal of growth. Now, two things are happening. One is in the county. So you still are seeing, like out off Tallymore Road and somewhere out there, 5-acre lots, which is a pretty traditional rural sell for land. But what's happening is now the city of Spring Hill ran water and sewer under the interstate, basically following Rutherford Creek, coming about where the soccer fields, you know, if you've ever driven north on 65 and you look and those soccer fields are off to the right, that's Jim Warren Road over there. That's where it's going through. So we're looking at Joe Brown. We have a neighborhood of about 60 new homes, and it's probably around $260,000 homes that's actually going in on the corner of 431 and Joe Brown. Yeah, right in there. So you're going to see that come in. It's actually a little further north. It's the next one up.
Okay.
Right up, right there. Right there. So you've got one coming in there. That, you see at the very top right there, there's kind of that triangle right above where his mouse is right there. That is a 1,200-acre farm that our understanding has sold for development. It is right as you go across the line into Williamson County. If you know where the water tower is at the end of Jim Warren Road, it says Murray County Water. Basically, the land to the south of that has been sold for development. You also have a couple of farms on Jim Warren right across the interstate that are old dairy farms, right where those soccer fields are, that have just been sitting and waiting on that water to come.
And let me just mention that Murray County Water did make a presentation to the County Commission in the last couple of 3 months about expanding their water services out in this area because of those development opportunities.
And so that you see that both Spring Hill's headed that way, and Murray County Water both is going to add another tower, I think. So a lot of growth coming there. 431 has become a really busy road because you can get to 840, and 840 leads everywhere, right? You can go to Dixon, you can go to Murfreesboro, wherever. So 431 has really become a heavy travel. It's a rough road for us to drive on buses, but it's picking up lots
That'd be that road right there, right?
Yeah. No. Yes, that's it. 431 right there. But we see that now to the south of Bear Creek, out there, you're really not seeing much. If you see a new home, it's on a 5 to or larger acre lot. But that corner up there really is picking up very fast.
And I brought it up for 2 reasons. I know because we had talked about, again, about this, not just the impact on changing the numbers of the schools, but the impact on the bus route, simply because we have a lot of buses with low capacity on them because it's such a long route. You start to up the capacity, and it means adding significantly number of buses and or really changing the route. So I just want to be mindful of that as we're moving ahead.
And we're seeing right now, even a non-busing issue is around Marvin Wright. We're picking up so many kids that are in that walk zone. And we're about to see, Spring Hill Middle School was our only walk zone with 0 students in it. And as Homestead comes about, suddenly now that's going to be a new walk zone that if you do the true 1.5 mile circle could have 1,200 homes in it. So we've got to look kind of at that moving forward.
Anything else? All right, we'll move on to the cleanup recommendations.
And this recommendation actually came out of my office. We currently have a section of Brown Elementary School down Camelsville Pike that students leave Brown Elementary School and go to Mount Pleasant to middle school and high school. Brown is a 3-way split. Brown kids leave and go to Cox to middle school, they go to Whitthorne to middle school, or they go to Mount Pleasant to middle school. It's the only school that we have that's like that. If you looked at that map, the Brown zone kind of looks like Italy. It's kind of a urban zone. It's got a big boot that hangs off the bottom. We're asking that boot, which is a Mount Pleasant middle school and high school area, you see it right there, that currently goes to Mount Pleasant for middle school, high school. We're asking that just be moved elementary-wise to Mount Pleasant as well. It makes sense because we're running 2 sets of buses. We're running a Brown bus and the Mount Pleasant buses. And we fight more questions with this area than anywhere of folks saying, why can my kindergartner not ride the bus to Mount Pleasant? Well, by board policy, they would be out of zone to Mount Pleasant, and we do not provide transportation to those students. We do provide transportation in that busing zone to Brown. We have lots of issues from there. So we're asking that portion that is currently zoned to the middle school and the high school be moved for elementary as well. There's a second area of basically the Zion area. I don't know if he can pull right. I don't know if you can see it on that map. Just
let me. It's we'll blow up the map a little bit. It would be right over in here.
Come down. Right there. See the line that goes straight across right there.
Right here.
Right there, and it comes in and angles down. That area currently goes to Woodard Elementary School for elementary and to Mount Pleasant for middle school and high school. We run a separate bus for Woodard kids out there versus Mount Pleasant middle and high. We're just asking that be made one contiguous zone, K through 12, rather than having kids start at Brown and Woodard and then go to Mount Pleasant later on.
How many additional students?
I think I've got that on the
right
sheet.
That's those numbers in it. 38.
Yeah. There's 38 students in the Camelsville Pike area, 28 go to Brown, 4 already go to Mount Pleasant, and you see 41 in Zion, 28 go to Woodard, and 8 go to Mount Pleasant already.
So if you did both of those areas?
It's about 79 kids.
79.
We figured 75 back in the fall, so 79 to 80, 75 to 80, somewhere through there. That doesn't really impact Mount Pleasant Elementary School that greatly, but it does eliminate 2 buses that only serve one area. It frees 2 buses up for me to serve high impact areas rather than picking up those kids. You can see if there's 38 kids and 28 of them go to Joseph Brown, the bus some days has 20 kids on it. But he's running over an hour because he has to come up Camelsville Pike, go down the road, turn around, come off the other side, go down, turn around for 20 kids. He would be better served somewhere else, and that would put them with their siblings and with the other kids that already go to that they'll be with once they get to 5th grade.
Yeah, I know the number of phone calls you must get, because I've gotten a lot. The bus turns around in their driveway, but they can't put their elementary school kid on there.
We've lost a couple of turnarounds actually because of that. If they can't get on, you can't turn around here. I don't get to override board policy. A board policy says they can't ride, so we've had to adjust some things for that. So that was the only reasoning that we brought that to the task force, was just to make that make more sense for the district. And it does free up a little room at Brown and Woodard.
Do those schools really need room? I mean,
you remember that as the task force, our third priority that we were given 3 things. 1, the new schools. 2, Spring Hill to Central, and the third thing was to look at the elementary schools in Columbia. So in that scenario, it did help, because as we were looking at the elementary schools in Columbia, it was freeing up space for us.
And so that was used in those other adjustments, which we did not bring forward today, because it was our understanding out of the conversation last week that wasn't a part of today's discussion.
okay. Any other questions? All right. Current enrollment and out of zone?
Yeah, I think the questions were asked about this, so we added this, those numbers we gave you this was done in September, I think, when it was originally started, so the enrollment numbers were as of September. So Mr. Lang and his department provided all this. I don't know what you want to get into on this, Carl. You just pull up.
Current enrollment's fine for now.
Okay. It's hard to get all that on the same page.
And just make it large, we just scroll up and down so they can see it. There you go. I believe I had the date on there, the date that we pulled that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
So,
sir.
April 27th.
4/27, yeah. And we also attached a out-of-zone chart by school, which is very interesting. We start our early out-of-zone process, and it goes through, I think, May 12th, and that way we can get as many out-of-zones forms turned in schools, making decisions as possible. But also during the year, we get out-of-zone requests that are requested of kids move, parents move, and they want the kid to finish out the semester or finish out the year at a school where they've started. Once school starts, that's the #1 reason we get out of zones, because of family movement, and they really want to keep the kids there. So this year, we had 863 total students out of zone. This particular chart will...
Am I on the wrong?
You're on the right one. No, well, you're on a different one.
Okay. You want me to pull up the one you're talking about?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I mean, that works as well. They both say similar things, but the one that I'm looking at will show you where the kids come from and which schools they attend and where they come from. That's it right there. Okay. So across the top, it will tell you which school, the school name, and as you go down, you'll see Baker is on the left, Brown is on the left, and it tells you where they get the kids from. For example, Baker, they receive 5 kids from Brown, 4 kids from Culleoka this year, and you go all the way over, they have a total of 47 students that are out of zone or out of county, but just out of zone it was 44, if you go all the way across. So it tells you which school the kids came from and how many are out of zone for that particular school. That's one of the charts that we attached. And then we have another chart that will tell you by grade level.
That's the one I was showing.
Okay? It won't tell you, that chart won't tell you where they came from, but it'll tell you which grade levels are moving the most across the county. So we'll give you the opportunity to look at grade level. So Baker still received a total of 47 in the last column to the right. But now we've got 7 kindergartners, 8 first graders, 9 second graders, etc. So this will give you a breakdown. So we try to give you as much out-of-zone information as possible. And we also talk about out-of-zone. We had 75 students this year out of county, 55 were employees. Students out, so we only had 20 students out of county that paid the $1,850 out of county that were not employees. When we look at that number of 863 total out of zone, not out of county, but out of zone, 181 were employees of that 863.
We've got 860, and you're saying 863, so
I'm looking at 863 right there.
I'm just looking at the number you gave me, it says 860.
Oh, this is updated as of today, I'm sorry. Believe it or not, we still get out of zone this time of the year. We've got 2 or 3 in since we've posted these documents. Why? Sometimes parents move, but they want their kid to finish the school year in the school they started. So we had 3 out of zone requests since this was posted on the 27th. So I'm looking at 863, you all are looking at 860, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it.
I just want to make sure we...
I didn't realize, this was printed off today. So these are interesting charts to just kind of give you an idea of where kids are going in the pattern and what grade level. Any questions, anything that sticks out that we could comment on?
Do you know offhand how many of the out-of-zone students are special ed?
I do not have that data, but I will.
But typically, I mean, special ed students aren't zoned. They go to wherever their program is.
Correct. And I believe her question probably, we do have some special programs at certain schools that are countywide programs. So that may be what you're asking, because we have a couple of programs. They're not included in this, no.
And taking an example, if you're in the autistic program, anywhere in the county, you go to Marvin Wright Elementary School for elementary school. Anywhere in the county, you go to Withthorn for middle school, and anywhere in the county, you go to Mount Pleasant for high school. But they do not affect out of zone because they're simply sent because of their program.
So they're not part of these?
They're not part of this, no.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. Dudley?
Yes. So the schools where we're closest to near capacity, how do the out-of-zone students affect those schools? I guess Spring Hill High being one of them since we...
The general rule is we tell schools no more than 3 to 5% max. Some will choose 3% if they overcrowd it, especially elementary and middle school. They're looking at grade levels. My 5th grade is maxed out, so I can't take any new 5th graders. But 2nd grade, you know, or 6th grade, we've got room for maybe 12 or 14 more students before we reach capacity, so they may take a few more of those. So we let the individual principals make the call. If they deny the out of zone, then the parent will appeal it to my office, and then at that point, we find out and kind of peel the onion, why did you, and then we'll call the parent back, 4th grade is full at that school. So they look at 3 to 5% overall, but they also look at grade level by grade level, especially in elementary and middle school.
We have a couple elementary schools that are really close to capacity, Baker and McDowell. At what point do we cut off? I mean, Baker, with the projected for Baker is 371, and the capacity was 385, according to our 10-year plan. You've got 44 out of zone, so the difference is only 14 students.
How many are out of zone from Baker?
Those 44 kids are going to Baker out of zone. In the current numbers that you have include those out of zone kids.
Yeah, 47.
So we allow the principal to kind of make that call. and make a decision, and they can deny based on capacity.
So if you only have 14 spaces there, would that, left from what's projected for next year, for the 2018-2019 school year, you only have 14 spaces available there, and would you save those 14, I guess my question is, would you save those 14 for students that move into the area, or would you allow them to go to complete capacity, adding out-of-zone students?
That's, as I said, it's a conversation between our office and the school, the principal, because we say no more, we want to save at least a certain amount of percent. They should not accept any more than 3 to 5%, but if they're not at capacity in a grade level, then they can make a call on that individual grade level. So you're saying, are we reserving space for new additions? Mm-hmm. Anyone that moves into a zone, this is on the out-of-zone form. If you're approved out of zone, you could be returned to your school zone if that space is needed for a student that's in the zone. So we really never let an out of zone trump a student that lives in the zone or moves into the zone. Even if they've already been there for 3 years. That is correct. It takes the spot, but we try to make it work if we can. That would be a tough thing that you're in 4th grade now, and all of a sudden, the spring of your 4th grade year, oh, now we've got 4 more 4th graders, now we're out of capacity. So we'll look at staffing and some different things to see if we can make that work. We would hate to move a student at that time.
Yeah. Well, I was just surprised that other than the Spring Hill Elementary, that Baker and McDowell are the closest to capacity that we have.
Think about from having been around the system for a while. A lot of teachers at Central and Whitthorne take their children to Baker or McDowell because they're close to them. So you may have kids, a higher population of out of zone at Baker, not just because of teachers at Baker, but because that cluster is so near. And I see that at McDowell as well.
Okay, that makes sense.
And part of what the task force was charged with, which we're not discussing today, was looking at the Columbia elementary schools to try to work some balance there. So that would have addressed slightly some of those.
That will be on our next discussion? Or next
well,
meeting?
it's up to the chair and the decision of what we discuss.
I think at this point, we've covered what we had for today, so we can talk about what the plans are going forward. Okay. That's what people want to do.
So what's left, just to talk about how we address the elementary in Columbia, is that?
From what the task force did, we had a couple of more small cleanups, but they came within that elementary discussion.
One thing that, I don't know if you mentioned it, but when we were doing the high school, there was a rezoning of 31 students to, or something like that, to Santa Fe.
We did, we looked at that because, and that came out of, again, an area that is currently zoned. If you pull the map up of the current elementary zones, we have again, a funny area.
We didn't put that in that.
We didn't put that in there.
Might could be classified in that cleanup.
Right, it would be part of the cleanup that we talked about. But yeah, it did affect.
That's not it.
In that Baker's area right there, it is.
Yeah.
That funny area out on the far east of the Baker. Yeah, we moved through the task force. They decided to move that to Santa Fe because it geographically made more sense. And it moved about a total of 31 over the K-12. It was not 31 high school, it was 31 over the K-12. But again, just tried to, that was part of the discussion that came up during the elementary and later on.
And I think that also had to do with the elementary schools as much as the high school.
It did. It had to do with trying to help Baker and some things with that as much as it did with the high school.
I hate to bring it up, but what about the Culleoka? We haven't talked about it.
It wasn't on the agenda.
I know it's not on the agenda, but we're talking about what in coming time? Okay.
And I'll just say from a task force perspective, as we originally went into the task force, as we brought, and I say we, central office, brought a recommendation to the board, it all stemmed out of what was recommended through the 10-year plan. That was not a part originally of the 10-year plan recommendations. But that discussion rose out of the task force, I think because of some previous discussions about space at Culleoka for a Project Lead the Way classroom and some things that that made members of the task force, I think that there needed to be some space things adjusted. So that kind of came out of that discussion, but it was not in the original work that was originally presented as far as a response to the 10-year plan. And that's not saying should or shouldn't have been. I'm just trying to give a little bit of history of how that occurred.
Well, going forward, what's staff recommendation on the next steps now that we've kind of addressed the northern area of the county? What makes sense going forward?
And again, because we were working off of all of this enrollment projections that were done as part of that 10-year study, I would say Dr. Marzak and Mr. Perriman, Mr. Lang, we still feel like at some point we need to address the elementary schools in Columbia, whether that be now or later, but at some point that would need to be, because there is quite a bit, as Mr. Perriman mentioned, there's quite a bit of discretion. We've got some schools that are almost full, like a McDowell and like a Baker, but we've got some other schools like Woodard, for instance, where there's quite a bit of capacity still left in the school. Highland Park, where there's still quite a bit of capacity.
We're about to see a large part of Randolph Howell open back up because you're moving those kids.
Yeah, and we're going to move some kids and open up some space.
Number open.
Yeah, we're going to open up some space at Howell, so we were going to adjust around and fill up some of those spaces. Riverside Elementary is one that right now there is capacity, but one of the neighborhoods we know that are under development that we expect to develop quick is Countryside Village, which is a mobile home park. Is that what those are called? I don't know exactly, but you all know what I'm talking about there. And there has been already approved by the City of Columbia the opportunity to develop the number of units in there. We currently run one.
We load 72 children at Countryside Village for elementary school.
For Riverside Elementary.
At one stop, we load 66 for middle school, and they out of place go to Cox, which is very far from where they are compared to Withorn. And then we load about 56 going to Central High School. So we have 3 buses that make one stop on that run, and it is simply at the end of the driveway across the road from my office. And they're about to double the size of that neighborhood.
And if that goes to 70 plus more elementary students, we can't accommodate that.
Right.
The direction of the board, I guess the direction that staff was indicating is to look at elementary schools in Columbia next.
Yeah.
Will that include looking at the possibility of bringing 5th grade back into the elementary schools as a part of those options? Can you do that?
And the only thing we can go back to, because we haven't done any study of that, is again what was reported in the 10-year plan. And their evaluation was there wasn't capacity to do that within the existing elementary schools that we had, that it would take an increase in capacity, and I think they calculated the cost of that. Again, we were looking at simply if you take what's now grades K through 4 and make it K through 5. Unless the board gives us other direction, that's the only study that's been done. So again, that's how we would have to respond to that. We certainly can study it, but that's the only study.
Can you study it? I know I think that's something that from a parent side, I hear a lot of times they don't feel like 5th graders need to be in middle school. And then we talked last time about the dead year that is from a sports and whatnot. And I don't know that from a budget standpoint, we've looked at how to address what Mr. Lane brought up the last time as far as addressing those 5th grade sports needs. So I still think it's something that we need staff to dig into. And, there's a lot of things in Dr. Register's report that we have pretty much glossed over. So I don't know that I would take one piece of that and say that, okay, well, I would just like to see the option.
Yeah, and we could certainly, do the investigation to see what those numbers would look like. We just haven't done that.
Right.
Now, would that also cause us to go back and look at our new schools? Because if we're putting the elementary schools and pulling from K4, then if we're talking about investigating K5, that even changes the scenarios of Marvin Wright and which ones go to the new Battle Creek, et cetera, in capacity.
And it would open the discussion up to middle schools as well. Middle schools would have to be a natural discussion to go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you would be dropping such a capacity in those schools.
Right.
You know, you couldn't discuss moving them without discussing both sections.
But I would think it'd be pretty easy to just take the numbers and just say, okay, at this school, if we added 5th grade, how many students is that? And that would pull, if they were Baker students, that'd pull this many out of Whitthorne. If they were Martin Wright students, that'd pull this many out of the, and we could do that countywide. If you all like this, I guess that'd be a first pass, is at least bring you a chart and show you what those numbers look like.
I think just to give us some perspective on it, I mean, I don't know that we have to be locked in, and I don't know if you want to do a trial run in Columbia or a trial run in Spring Hill and see what that impact is. I mean, just to see where we can go.
Okay.
I just have a question about this, I'm sorry, about the sports. Do they have sports in elementary school?
They have some. They have some
Cross country.
Cross country.
They also have a some of the schools do basketball.
Elementary school, they have.
As part of our strategic plan, oh, I'm sorry.
It's rec league on Saturdays.
Yeah, it's a rec.
No, it's not on Saturday. Do we not use buses to transport those kids during the school day?
For elementary school basketball, I'm unaware of any organized elementary school basketball league.
I mean, I spent several days at Riverside the last couple of years.
We did the tournament. They had been doing, Mr. Brown had them doing the tournament. They did it the Armory in Riverside, and they did it at Riverside School. And if you remember, we did bus in 5th graders over one day, and they played basketball at Riverside. And
it was a one-day tournament.
Graders also.
Was it 4th grade? We did one day for 4th grade and one day for 5th grade. We did those 2 days. There was that, and that may have been last year.
And that was organized by our athletic department.
It was organized through, yes, through the athletic director. But we did bus students to those activities.
Well, I found that to be a valuable athletics experience for kids, so I would say that that's athletics in middle school. I mean, in elementary.
Mr. Dudley.
I forgot about that.
Are we only looking at 5th graders moving back because of sports?
No.
I mean,
No.
well, the staff, the 5th graders don't have any contact, very minimum contact with the older students. They're segregated in their own wings of the schools. In the cafeteria, basically they go and they're sitting in one block or one segregated group. And you know, it's just an awful expensive and unnecessary change just so a kid can play sports. And most of the elementary schools don't have sports anyway. And then I wish if we were going to do that, we'd have started this earlier before we approved the northern sections. If we go back, it's going to change all the numbers in the schools that we just talked about.
I'll just comment that I don't think it was about sports when I brought it up or even thinking about it. And I know it's going to be a really stretch to do it. I understand that. I totally do. I just feel like 5th graders are elementary students. There's a big physicality, emotional. I mean, they're children. And the unit schools, yes, they have separate wings. They're smaller schools than what you're feeding into with Thorne and Spring Hill Middle and Cox. Huh? They do have their own wing, right, and I think they do somewhat with Thorne, and I accept whatever the board wants to do. I just don't think that my initial bringing it up had anything to do with sports. I think that's just another aspect of it.
I'm not an educator, but I do have access to educators in the middle school, and I simply have asked, from your perspective as an educator, do you feel like these kids should be in middle school or elementary? And without a beat, not one person has said they should be in middle school. They all, without question, say these kids need to stay in elementary school, but from a maturity level, and it's making these 4th graders be exposed to the attitudes of 8th graders. And we made it. I've had 2 that have done it. I mean, we were making it fine, but it's not in the best interest of kids. And if you ask any 5th grade teacher or principal at those levels, who, at least the ones I've asked, without hesitation say they should be in elementary school. And I think if our mission statement is educate every kid for life, why aren't we doing the best we can for them? I mean, thank you.
Thank you. And I think I brought this up last time we talked about, ideally, just as an ideal, feel like that they probably should be at the elementary level. My concern is going to be on several things. One, I think I don't want to jeopardize what the core thing of this whole point was to bring the new schools online. I think this is a very expensive, and I think the numbers will bear that out. This is going to be a very expensive thing, and it may change some major reformatting of how we do a lot of things. And I'm not sure they can do that, that our staff can do that in just a month or two of time and still be able to give us ample time to have the rezoning done so that everybody's well aware of that. Maybe this should be something that would be looked at over a longer period of time, maybe the next time we do something, especially if we're still talking about, as we've presented to the County Commission, the request for additional funding again for new schools. I think that should be tied into this as well, looking at how big we're building schools. If we're going to be building new elementary schools or new schools, to accommodate that from a planning standpoint, to go ahead and plan to start building new facilities that account for that. I'm just not sure right now is the right time to do that. But I would agree that I think it probably should happen at some point. Again, and just the other thing I think it's definitely something they should look at. I'm worried it's going to derail kind of what needs to happen now for something we want to do. The other thing, just to be mindful again that we would be moving a lot of kids at that point. And even though it may be good in the long run, that is a reshuffling a lot of kids going to new schools or changing how they do things. I just would be mindful of that. I know that was something we were trying to avoid, which is why we came back here and had these meetings again. So.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Bates. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Mr. Bates.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure how to get recognized, and I don't want to jump in front of anybody else. I was just going to say, I'm not sure that it would necessarily hurt to take a look at it. If it would seem to be that staff would be able, with all their maps, be able to do some things that would just see what the numbers would look like. And that way, I think there may be some practical issues, but I would like to see what it looks like. And that way we're not just guessing whether it's practical or not. We can actually kind of take a look at it. So I would be in favor of at least seeing some maps and seeing what it would do to the numbers, and then we can figure out where to go from there. And hopefully that wouldn't slow things down very much.
I know you're wanting to wrap this up. I had two notes here I want to do as we move forward with this. One was, and it was brought up about the open zone policy, and I know that we had talked about kind of a 3 to 5% rule. I don't know, personally, I would like to see something a little more concrete, simply because, and I think Chair Parker brought this up as a point, we don't want to get into a thing where as we rezone, and I think we're going to start seeing a few more rezones over the next few years, where we rezone students and next thing you know, those students have applied for out of zone and they're right back where they were, and the problem hasn't been solved. I don't know what the answer to that is. I just would like to have a little more discussion on it, or maybe some direction from staff on how that looks functionally, just so we don't get back into that mess. The other one was based on what we've, and I'm assuming that from everyone here that the options that were already presented, that were presented by the task force are still acceptable to this part. If that's the case, can we get some new charts showing what the capacity numbers look like based on just to this point? It would be helpful, I think, to get a total breakdown similar to the final chart that was given, the same format if you could, if that makes sense. Showing what the old percentages were, what the new ones will be, and that breakdown. And then I think we could start to decide what else we change from there.
So if I'm understanding, before we had done a chart that pretty much showed all of the schools with all the changes, you're talking about a chart that would show just these that we've covered today and what the changes would be, or would all the schools with these changes that we've... I
would think it would be helpful just to keep all the schools listed, but only show the new changes.
That we've talked about.
And perhaps obviously update it with whatever current numbers you're using for projections. I think that we're now, several months later.
Okay. Just make sure we...
Just to know what our starting point is now as we continue to discuss other things.
We understand.
From a timing standpoint, staff, how much time do you feel like you guys need for the next phase?
Since we are right here at the end, and we're in the silly season of about 200 field trips over the next 2 weeks, right. Probably a little bit more than we would have needed during the middle of the year.
Right.
Beginning of June.
Beginning of June would be, I'm gone 2 weeks. to conferences.
We need to before, yeah, the problem when we get into June, we get into our conference,
Last
season,
week
probably
of-
the last week of May.
Probably last week of May would be the best time.
Memorial Day week, is that what you're talking about?
That would work for us.
Yeah.
Okay. Dates, times, I know there's been some complaints about the timing of this meeting, so if somebody wants to propose something else. Maybe staff can just give us some, look at their schedule, give us some dates and times that work best for them, and then we can send that out to the board and get some feedback.
What have we got budget meeting wise and everything? I know we had to have everything by June the 4th.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? So,
Do we meet that week? Is the board meeting that week?
No, the board meeting's the previous week due to Memorial Day.
I imagine we will have a budget meeting that week. And then there was also discussion about the possibility of meeting with the county commission jointly at some point, and that was a week that was given as an option. I would imagine that would be during the evening.
Not the 14th.
We can do the 14th too, if that's something, but we need to move on that just so we can provide notice.
And Madam Chairman, if I might suggest, our original hope was to get this done to distribute before school is out. Looks like that's not going to happen. So maybe our goal would be to distribute by the time school begins. If that's the case, it might be that this could wait and be revisited at the end of June if there's other meetings. Because pretty much when you hit the summer, this information, we were going to distribute it through the schools, and that really can't happen during the months of June and July because students aren't there. Just throw that out as a thought.
Sounds good.
Because you've got graduations coming up too, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Graduations
Yes, ma'am.
for those,
But when we get to the
2
last
weeks?
week of June,
It-
June
they're
and,
open
and
the
then
20th.
of July, we're good.
They can open that week.
That gives us
Well, if staff can just start by providing some dates that work with Mr. Perryman and Mr. Breeden, particularly with y'all's schedule with conferences that you mentioned that you had, and then we can get that information out to the board and set it. We will be meeting again in the next week or so, so I'm sure we can talk at that time about possible dates and times once we meet.
We haven't firmed up the commission on the 14th then, so we'll just move that forward. That would have to be.
I think at this point we're adjourned unless staff has any questions. All right, thank y'all.